Cancorla, the Taoiseach describes the circumstances that we're in as an unprecedented disruption in financial markets. I think that what we have seen over the past 24 hours is that a decade of corporate greed, of property speculation, and in many cases of irresponsible banking have come home to roost. Now, I accept that the government have had to act to deal with the crisis in banking and in the financial markets, and I hope it works. But I have a number of serious concerns and questions about the decision that the government has taken, the effect of which is to give a guarantee to the banks of the order of almost 3 times our total national income, a guarantee that if it was called in full would take 37 years of our income tax receipts in order to clear it. Now, I can see what's in this for the banks, and I can see what's in it for bank shareholders, some of whom indeed have already made gains today on the strength of the guarantee that's been given. And I can see what's in it for top bank executives. The six chief executives of the 6 banks concerned, between them earn €13 million a year. But what I can't see is what's in it for the people of the country or for the taxpayer who may yet have to pay the bill for it. Taoiseach, if you're proposing to hand over the deeds of the country to bail out the banks, what are we getting in return? Now, I've heard you say that we're going to have a charge, which, as I read it, would be passed on to the bank customer in any event. I heard the Minister for Finance this morning say that there was going to be conditions attached to this deal. I spoke with the Minister for Finance this morning, had a briefing from his officials in the early afternoon. I've yet to hear what the conditions are that are being attached to this deal, and I'd like to hear them from you now. Are we in a situation that the state, the public, are going to effectively take all of the risk of Irish banking, but that the banks themselves will get the gain? I heard you say in response to Deputy Kenny that the taxpayer won't be at risk and that the sector will discharge any call down the road. I'd like you to explain that to me, because I don't understand it from your description of it. Is it not the case that the guarantee that you are now giving to the banks is just as likely to embolden the banks to take even greater risk? And what is the decision going to do to the country's own creditworthiness? Banks certainly will be able to borrow, but where will it leave the state's capacity to borrow? And where does it leave our position in relation to the perception out there of our national debt? Is it going to be seen as the 46 billion that it is, or is it going to be seen as the 46 billion and on top of that the 400 billion guarantee that you're now giving to the banks? Last night, due to what you call the unprecedented disruption in the financial markets, you could have bought a 50% stake in the entire banks in this country for 5 billion. Instead, you've given them a guarantee for almost 500 billion. So what I want to know from you, Taoiseach, and you haven't answered it yet here in the House, is the nuts and bolts of this deal. What are the conditions? What are the banks being asked to return? And what's in it for the public and for the taxpayer? That's very good, Cancorla, and frankly I don't need any lecture at all from the Taoiseach about the importance of the banking sector to the economy, and I'd remind him that as far back as the 25th of June last, I raised here with him the difficulties that were emerging at that time in banking, the difficulties that people were experiencing with banks and the effect of the credit squeeze that was already beginning to be experienced at that time, and I urged him at that stage, before the summer, to get engaged with the banks and the problems of banking in this country. The Taoiseach makes it sound as though this guarantee doesn't amount to anything at all. I mean, if all of the figures that have been talked about during the course of the morning ranging from 300 billion to 500 billion, if they're all wrong, can the Taoiseach tell the House what is the extent of the state's exposure as a result of the guarantee, or is there any exposure at all? Secondly, and you know, it's not a case of the government acting. As I said at the beginning, I hope this works. I'm not criticising the government for having acted, but I want an explanation for the decision that has been taken. And the explanations that I'm looking for, and that haven't been forthcoming as of yet, is very simple. If we are taking a risk as a state, and we are, if we're providing a guarantee to the banking system, there's a risk in it for the state and ultimately for the taxpayer. Now what are we? Well, let me tell you, Sean, you've been doing nothing for quite a while now. Quite a while. When it comes to doing nothing, you're the specialists. And that's why the Irish economy is in the difficulty that it is in now. But what we have to do is deal with what we have. Now, a decision has been made to provide a guarantee. There is a risk to the state in that. There is a risk to the taxpayer in that. The banks are going to gain from it, and that's good for banking, obviously, and they will continue on. I want to understand, if you take a risk, what's the return? What comes back? And I haven't heard that spelled out. Secondly, I hear the Taoiseach making all kinds of assurances that the banking sector will ultimately carry the can here. That there are going to be that the government will ensure that there'll be good management practices, that there'll be better regulation and so on. I want to see the nuts and bolts of that. So can I ask you, Taoiseach, we haven't yet been circulated with the bill that is going to give effect to this. Are the nuts and bolts of the conditions that are supposed to be attached to this deal, are they going to be spelled out and listed in the bill? We haven't yet heard what those conditions are. We hear lots of assurances, we hear lots of, that it's going to be fine and that the government will see to it and all of that. And I hope that's right. But what we do want to see, and what I think we're entitled to hear, what the representatives of the people gathered in this House are entitled to hear, and what the public are entitled to hear, is that if the state itself, if ultimately the taxpayer is going to have to bear a risk to bail out banking, right now, and if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. But we want to see what the extent of that risk is, what's the return for the risk, and what are the conditions that are going to be attached to it. And so far, we haven't heard that.